So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Alucard Vampire. So let's start the series. Integra Helsing, the leader of the Helsing organization and the master of Alucard, the no-life king, also known as Dracula, the most powerful vampire to have ever lived, said, Alucard, do not close your eyes. That's an order. Integra wore a dark green suit, and her platinum blonde hair was long, with two bangs framing her face and ending just below her chest. Her blue eyes glowed with desperation and that silent rage. A woman called Sarah's Victoria stood next to her, looking anxious. She wore the female equivalent of the Helsing family's outfit, and her fiery red eyes shone with determination and a hint of despair. Her long blonde hair was secured in a spiked ponytail. A man with long black hair was staring off into the rising sunlight, while both of them watched on a screen projector. His ruby-red eyes watched the sunrise with longing and a hint of tiredness. He was dressed totally in black, though it appeared that his clothes were a straight jacket. A man wearing all white was standing behind the two women. His blonde hair was slicked back, and a few bangs were slicked just over his left eye. His yellow eyes were beaming with triumph, and his lips were pulled back into a huge shit-eating smile. Integra, Alucard said quietly. I apologize, Master, but I am unable to follow that order. Alucard, shouted Integra. Sarah's, take care of Master, Alucard said gently. Sarah sniffed a little and said, Why yes, Master, of course, in a sorrowful murmur. Alucard smiled softly and muttered, Goodbye, Integra, as he slowly closed his eyes. A teenager stood in front of Alucard, watching him with irate eyes. Damn it! This is not how it was supposed to be. I was supposed to give Alucard a fair fight, with anguish and anger in his mind. When Integra heard laughter, she turned to face the Major, her face changing to one of pure rage and hatred, her blue eyes glinting murderously as she stalked slowly towards the laughing man. Integra watched in sorrow as her close friend and confidant vanished as if he had never existed in the first place. She clenched her fist and smothered the tears that were welling in her eyes. All he felt was darkness, nothingness, and weightlessness. He had no idea how long he had been living this gloomy life. All he knew was that he needed to find a solution to the issue that had caused him to enter this small state of rest. However, he was unexpectedly struck by a dazzling light just as he was about to exterminate the millions of souls he had stashed within of him in order to rid himself of this nothingness. His crimson-red eyes slowly opened, and he looked about, but all he could see was a great expanse of white ground. Is the purgatory here? With a hint of surprise and anticipation, he thought. He immediately turned around after sensing a presence behind him, only to be confronted by a demonic face. White robes, long spiked white hair, a purple mask that appeared to be smiling all the time, eyes that were completely black with only the iris remaining yellow, a dagger in its mouth that displayed yellow fang teeth, and lastly, little red horns protruding from its head. Alucard said inquisitively, Who are you? With a little inclination of his head, wondering who this creature was. I am known simply as the Shinigami to all beings. I am the god of death, and the fairy to guide all souls to their spot in the afterlife, the creature said in a deep, stern voice after staring at him for a number of long moments. Truly? How curious and wonderful! Alucard exclaimed, his eyes widening a little before they returned to normal. I had always wondered what death was like, and now I finally have experienced it. So tell me, what is my spot in the afterlife? It's hell, isn't it? He asked with a full-blown smile. The Shinigami raised his head slightly. You are mistaken, you are not dead, you are experiencing a near-death experience. While your body in the living world was destroyed, you are somehow still living on. Perhaps it has to do with the fact that there are millions of souls within you that are still sustaining you, said the Shinigami. I see, so tell me what happens now, Shinigami-san? Am I to forever remain here in limbo with only you as company? Alucard inquired, his shit-eating grin returning as he gazed upon the death god. Shinigami began to hum. I am not certain. You were not expected to die until the end of your world, yet here you are. I cannot send you back to your world, seeing as you technically died there, despite you somehow still living on, although there is always that option, said Shinigami. Alucard raised an eyebrow and inquired curiously. What option would that be? I could use my power and randomly send you off into a different world altogether. However, I would demand compensation for such an action, and I would alter your true form into something else, Shinigami said, casting an ethereal glare on him as though he were passing judgment on the vampire. After giving the death god a single blink, Alucard asked, Why would you need to alter my appearance? His expression was unreadable. By sending you into another world, you are essentially starting a new life. Thus the need to change your form into something else, you would live a new life. There wouldn't be much of a difference. You would still retain your powers, abilities, your souls within you, and your memories. You can choose to live your new life however you wish. You can even choose to live as a servant to another human should you choose to. Alucard watched the Shinigami with curiosity. He knew that eventually he would have to leave Ceres alone, even though he didn't want to leave her and his master Integra alone. He couldn't watch over her all the time. He wanted her to make her own decisions and grow up to be independent, which wouldn't happen if he watched over her all the time. Though it tore at his immortal and blackened heart, he had no choice but to accept the fact that Integra would eventually either be resealed or that his master would die of old age. In addition, he believed in Ceres and Integra because they were strong, with steely wills and resolves, and he knew they would win the battle with Millennia. Before I give you my answer, I'm curious, what would the compensation be? And wouldn't Kami have a problem with this? He said, turning to face the deity of death. To answer your first question, my compensation is simple. I want 20,000 of the souls that you have consumed. Why would you want only 20,000? Most of the souls that you have consumed are those who have committed various sins and heinous crimes during their lives. However, you have also consumed various innocents as well. With my eyes, I can tell apart the innocent souls, along with the corrupt souls within you. 20,000 innocent souls are within you. That is my compensation. Allow me to take those 20,000 souls, the No-Life King pondered. Very well then, I'll let you take those souls, not like I have another 3 million in there or something. With a faint smirk of amusement and surprise. Really? 20,000 innocent souls live within me? Didn't know that. I just assumed they were nobodies. I guess there is such a thing as being in the wrong place at the wrong time, Alucard said. Shinigami smiled and said, As for your second question, do not worry about my brother Kami. I am his brother. I am certain I can convince him to agree to this. If I can't, I'll just get Yami's assistance. So when are we getting started? Alucard asked with a little nod, and the No-Life King smiled expectantly. The No-Life King grunted in surprise as Shinigami dug his hand into Alucard's chest, saying, Right now, but first, my compensation. The cold hand digging into Alucard's soul was an odd and painful sensation, but he was able to handle the pain. He was shot to pieces and then reforming shortly after. If he couldn't handle this, Then he was just like those weak and pitiful vampires from his world. After a few seconds, the death god asked, "The compensation has been taken, and now, it's time to alter your form. Which form would you prefer?" Shinigami clenched his fist and pulled out hundreds of tiny blue orbs that were hovering just above his hand. When he opened them again, the blue orbs were gone. Alucard sighed. "Form does not matter to me. I do not care what form I take, so long as I'm at least familiar with it, then I'm fine with it." "Very well," said Shinigami. Alucard felt his entire body change without his control, and he soon noticed that he was getting smaller and that her hair was growing longer. He also felt his entire body transform into a familiar form that he had only recently changed into to have sex with Walter. With a mirror in his hand, the Shinigami gave it to Alucard. The 14-year-old woman's face, with her long, silky black hair and bangs covering her forehead, her scarlet-red feminine eyes, the white outfit she typically wore when assuming this form, and of course a white hat perched on her head, was what Alucard saw when he took the mirror. "My girl form?" Alucard asked, but she was taken aback when her usual male voice shifted to a gentle, melodic tone. Her new voice was odd, but she was sure she could make it sound a little more sinister because, after all, she was Alucard, the no-life Key Queen. After Shinigami put a finger on Alucard's hand and said, "You did say a form you were familiar with, so I ended choosing a form that you used just recently. One more thing." The seal that bound her to the Helsing family vanished from her gloves. Shinigami then reached into Alucard's form again and extracted a very familiar form. Oh! The entire reason Alucard was in limbo was now in the Shinigami's palm. His blonde hair stopped at his mid-neck, his black cat ears were on top of his head, his purple eyes were gleaming anxiously, and a sheepish grin escaped as he smiled nervously. With a deadpan tone in her voice, Alucard said, "Oh, it's you. What's your name again?" Schrödinger twitched his eye and exclaimed, "It's Schrödinger!" Alucard uttered the words, "I'll just call you Dinger." With a broad grin on her face and gleaming fangs and bloodlust-filled scarlet eyes. Schrödinger swallowed, after saying, "Schrödinger, you are going to be spending quite a bit of time with Yami. I do not pity you." Shinigami pulled open a gateway and threw the cat boy into it. Alucard could only see darkness and wondered whether those were black flames. "Now then, as per our agreement, I shall now send you randomly into another world. Are you prepared?" Shinigami remarked, causing Alucard to smile expectantly. When Shinigami waved a hand over Alucard's head and said, "One last thing," the no-life queen was instantly inundated with pictures and the knowledge of how to form a servant's seal, like the one the Helsing family used to force her to serve them. Alucard shook her head to clear the cobwebs and asked, "Why would you give me this knowledge?" Shinigami held out his palm and a green portal appeared above it. The portal slowly floated off his hand and onto the ground in front of Alucard. "You forget that I told you, you can choose to become a servant to someone else should you choose to. The knowledge is merely there should you really do choose that course of action. Now then," Shinigami said, "simply jump into the portal, and you shall be taken across time and space, across many different planes of existence, and many different realities. Pleasure doing business with you, Shinigami-san," she remarked, making a little mocking bow, before she leaped into the portal, her laughter resonating, as Alucard smiled and she started excitedly towards the portal. "I do not pity the world that she has gone into," Shinigami said. He had allowed the vampire to go for a new planet for the straightforward reason that the afterlife was not prepared for that sociopath. Alucard eventually appeared through the portal after what seemed like an eternity, and she immediately looked up at the night sky with the full moon hanging in the starry sky. With her red eyes glimmering with bloodlust, Alucard smiled and flashed her gleaming fangs. "What a wonderful night for a drink," she said with a menacing giggle. She sniffed the air to see if she could detect the scent of any living thing, and she succeeded in detecting the scent of a great number of people farther into the forest, and an even greater number of people a little farther away. "Well, maybe they're fighting a war right now." But when she smelled blood, fresh blood, she became alert, she thought. She quickly knelt down and leaned her head over the blood like a predator, her tongue slowly coming out of her mouth and giving the blood puddle long, savoring licks, her scarlet red eyes zooming in on a puddle of crimson liquid in an instant, and she smiled broadly as she advanced upon it. She paused after a few licks, her scarlet eyes glimmering with astonishment and delight. "This blood is more delicious than in Turgra," she said. She looked at the memories that the blood would undoubtedly hold and wondered who could have such exquisite blood. "This is by far the most delicious blood I have ever had the pleasure of drinking," she said. The memories she saw were of a young boy with spiky sun-kissed blonde hair, sapphire blue eyes, and whisker marks on his cheeks. The last memory she had of the boy was of him being chased into this very forest with a sizable mob following him. What she saw made her laugh hysterically, with a gleeful undertone in her voice, and her eyes glinting madly with insanity and slight happiness. She could sense the boy's feelings through the blood as well: fear, desperation, the will to live, hopelessness, but also the determination to never give up or back down in spite of the circumstances. She could also see deeper into the blond boy's heart, and he showed kindness and compassion that far surpassed her expectations. However, he also harbored a great deal of hatred, which may eventually surpass even hers. If unchecked, this hatred could wipe out the entire planet, and she would be the target of the boy's fury, anger, and hatred. Uzumaki Naruto, huh? With that thinking, Alucard stood up and walked slowly deeper into the woodland, a little skip in her step as her smile threatened to split her face in two. "You will make a splendid master," she said. Uzumaki Naruto was now feeling both scared and angry. The freshly turned 7-year-old's day had begun relatively regularly, waking up in his dingy apartment, and wandering the town while avoiding the harsh words and cruel looks of the locals. Then, at some point throughout the day, he prepared a prank to get even with some of the more outspoken villagers. Overall, it was just another typical day for him. Of course, he maintained the facade of a smiling fool, but his personality was far different from what he allowed the villagers to see. Although the villagers saw a perpetually smiling fool, he was surprisingly intelligent for a 7-year-old. He wasn't as intelligent as a Nara. No one could be as intelligent as a Nara, but he was intelligent enough to be regarded as a genius. Despite his seemingly carefree demeanor, he could be certain that he detested the majority of the Konoha villagers. But he wasn't petty. He could take glares, whispers, and all the insults. Those things weren't what made him detest them. Rather, it was the other things they did, like beating him occasionally, ejecting him from stores, and occasionally vandalizing his flat. If he had the authority, he would have paid those who mistreated him a lot of money, but he didn't, and there was no way for him to get stronger because the librarians typically wouldn't let him leave the library. The only way he could get stronger is to enroll in the academy the following year, but he would have to conceal his growth over the years and keep acting like the fool they believed him to be. Additionally, he was aware that they would undermine his academy grades in order to further paint him as a fool. Even though he detested the majority of the villagers, he had some that he did not, such as the Ikarakus, who were his sort of surrogate family, the Sandaime Hokage, who was his grandfather figure, and lastly, Inu and Aizen, the Anbu, who always protected him when he had the chance and occasionally bought him items to liven up his living space. When the sun started to set, he hurried back to his apartment after exploring the village. However, things quickly took a turn for the worse when a sizable group of villagers gathered and started chasing him into the forest. What's worse is that some shinobi were among them, which made escape even more challenging. In an attempt to escape the crowd, he was forced to go farther into the forest. He was struck by a kunai in the shoulder, which caused blood to gush out and fall to the ground below, but he ignored this and kept running farther into the forest. A few minutes later, he was hit by multiple more kunai, each of which struck his legs and sent him crashing to the ground. He hastily pulled himself to a tree and started pulling out the kwani that had been impaled to his shoulder and legs. Naturally, his wounds started to heal as soon as the kunai were taken out, and the boy with the blonde hair was ready to leap from the ground and flee his assailants. That strategy was thwarted when a foot struck his chest, trapping him to the tree he was leaning on. He experienced dread, desperation, and steadily building rage as the crowd moved in to attack him and beat him senselessly. And thus resulted in the blonde's current predicament, as he curled into a ball to protect his torso from harm, while the mob battered him. The blonde could hear the shouts of the mob as they all started to say that it was time to complete what the Yondaime had started, and this went on for a few minutes before they stopped. As he saw that they were drawing bladed weapons that were meant to rip into his flesh, Naruto's anxiety grew. "Truly you dogs amuse me so. You are so weak that you must beat on a child to prove you are strong. How weak and pathetic each of you are," they said, softly and sinisterly, before they could carry out their plan to maim the blonde. "We do not know who you are, stranger. But that is no child. It's a monster in human skin," exclaimed one of the villagers, while the others roared in agreement. The villagers were unnerved by the voice that seemed to come from everywhere and glared in all directions where they thought the voice was coming from. The voice started again. "Oh? A monster, you say?" With their cries that the blonde was a monster being heard, the locals all nodded their heads. Since he was certain that the person watching now thought he was a monster, Naruto felt all hope being dashed. He gritted his teeth and braced himself to suffer because it was the only thing he could do. But as the shadows started to rise and take shape, the forest fell eerily silent. Everyone watched in horror and shock as the shadows took the shape of a girl who was no older than 14. She had long black hair that fell down towards her back, bangs that covered her forehead, and scarlet-red eyes that gleamed with bloodlust. She was dressed in an all-white suit, black tie, and undershirt, and she had a white hat on top of her head and white gloves on. "You call this boy a monster?" she said softly, her voice sending shivers down their spines. "But there is only one monster I see here," her eyes gleaming with insanity. "That monster is me!" With a gleeful and maddening laugh, the girl lunged, her teeth sinking into the neck of a villager, and with a champ, the head was severed from its body. The girl was beaming broadly, flashing her white teeth and fangs, and her eyes were glaring at the mob with murder, as if they were the source of all the world's problems. The villagers screamed in fear and horror as the few shinobi in the crowd used their kunai to kill the girl with deadly precision. Alucard just smiled while the kunai impaled her body, and she tried to stop them. When the shinobi finally stopped, the villagers were relieved to see the girl's body on the forest floor, covered in injuries and kunai. Naruto was shocked and a little apprehensive as he watched the scenario. Why did he feel like it wasn't finished? Dogs can't kill me, she said, her voice resonating across the clearing. Only men can kill monsters. The blonde's question was answered when the body twitched, and blood started to rise from the ground and be absorbed into the body. Before everyone's eyes, all of the injuries the shinobi had caused started to heal, and soon the girl was standing, looking at them with her big smile still intact. With that, she lunged, tearing into the villagers as if it were nothing. The girl killed all the villagers without mercy, throwing limbs, skulls, and organs across the clearing and splattering blood everywhere. She even laughed loudly and gleefully, as though she were a child playing in the park. I said that only men can kill monsters, she said, turning to face him slowly as her eyes glinted with bloodlust. So what are you? Are you a dog? Or are you a man? She asked mockingly, taking slow, taunting steps, after the mob had all but one member, a whimpering, cowering civilian who was now leaning against a tree, died. The peasant raised his weapon, a tiny knife, and killed himself by dragging it across his throat. Alucard scowled and grumbled in frustration. I hate when they puss out like a bitch, she muttered. Her smile gradually reappeared, and she turned to face Naruto. Her smile became a little wider, and she strode slowly in the direction of her soon-to-be new master. As he watched the girl approach him, Naruto was unsure of what to think. Instead of feeling horror or fear when he saw her slaughter the villagers, he felt satisfaction because she killed them all. When the girl turned to face him, he expected her to look at him the same way she did at the villagers. He was sitting on the floor with his back against a tree, and the girl suddenly got on her knees to get to his level. Her face was too close to his own for him to like, but she wasn't. Out of pure instinct, Naruto grabbed a kunai that was lying around the floor and almost drove it into the girl's neck, but he stopped himself just in time, allowing the tip of the kunai to barely brush the girl's neck. If anything, Naruto's behavior made her smile even more. She purred, "Hello?" gazing at the blonde with half-lidded eyes. Hey? Naruto gulped and answered inquisitively. The girl did nothing, seemingly content to just stare at him, and Naruto was already growing weary of her encroaching on his personal space. Why did you help me? He asked slowly, as though he was still incredulous that someone was assisting him. Alucard smirked and cocked her head, saying, Why wouldn't I wish to protect my new master? And master? He whispered as Naruto froze and stared at her in shock. The blonde's long raven hair brushed Alucard's eagerly nodded head. Yes, well, should you accept to become my new master? If not, I'll just continue hounding you until you do, Alucard said. Naruto questioned. Why would you want to become my servant? Alucard's grin broadened. Why wouldn't I want you to be my new master? I've tasted your blood, and it's more delicious than my previous master's. I've seen your memories, and your will is stronger than my previous master's. You are strong in mind, spirit, your heart and strong as well. You have the perfect qualities to become my master. Why wouldn't I want someone strong to become my master? But in terms of physical power, I am weak, Naruto murmured solemnly. His blue eyes met Alucard's scarlet ones as a hand touched his cheek. You can be a feeble old man, and I would still choose you as my master. You are already a beautiful creature in my eyes. While physical power does indeed hold much merit, I'd rather focus on the strength that is in your heart, mind, and soul. So I ask again, will you allow me to serve you, master? Will you allow me to be the instrument of your wrath? As Naruto gazed into her eyes, he saw a lot of things, including madness, a disdain for everyone but those closest to her, and a deep-seated hatred in her soul. He also sensed a fierce devotion and loyalty. Gulping, Naruto made a choice that would alter his life forever. He said, "What's your name?" Alucard immediately responded, "My previous masters gave me the name Alucard. Should I take you as my servant, do you promise to never abandon me? To remain by my side until the end? To fight alongside me in every battle? To crush my enemies into nothing but a smear on the ground? To hear my enemies plead for mercy, only to receive none?" The brunette posed a serious question. With great delight, Alucard replied, "Nothing shall please me more, master. Then, I shall accept you as my servant." "Alucard, what is the requirements need to make this possible?" "Allow me to handle this, master," Alucard said as she raised her hands. Suddenly, the blood on the grass rose and swirled around the girl's hands. A circle soon formed on the back of the girl's hands, and it contained symbols that were similar to the ones she had when she served the Hellsing, but without the star in the center. Alucard grinned broadly and turned to face her new master, saying, "All that is left is for me to drink your blood, master." With little hesitation, Naruto cut himself across Alucard's hand with the same kunai he had almost used to stab him. Alucard quickly grabbed hold of his hand and licked the blonde's bleeding hand, causing Naruto to turn scarlet at her actions. Alucard giggled a little at her new master's agitated expression, and she watched with delight as a swirl formed in the center of the circles on the back of her hand. The runes shone brilliantly before becoming dulled. "The sealing is complete, master. I am now under your command, and I will follow any order you give me. And your wrath is now my wrath, your sorrow is now my sorrow, your hatred is now my hatred, your enemies are now my enemies. I shall kill thousands, millions, billions in your name, master. All you must do is give the command," Alucard said, her eyes gleefully sparkling, as she took the blonde in her arms with a big smile that threatened to splint her face. "That sounds nice," Naruto whispered, his face flushed as Alucard held his form close to her. The events of the day soon caught up with him, and he felt tired as his eyelids began to drop. Alucard gently said, "Rest, master, I shall deal with everything until you awaken." In his ear, Naruto followed her counsel and let sleep take over, subconsciously cuddling in the arms of his new servant. There was silence in the clearing for a few moments before Alucard started to tremble. Her body was shaking uncontrollably until she threw back her head and burst out laughing. Her crazed laughter reverberated into the night, frightening away any predators drawn to the blood scent. Her eyes were glowing ominously in the darkness, a scarlet glow that could be seen for miles, and her fangs were visible to everyone. With a fanged sneer and one last bark of laughter, the shadows rose up and swiftly encircled her, forming her new master. She clung to her master tenderly before the shadows ate them up and they vanished from the clearing. The shadows rose and grew in size and mass inside Naruto's apartment bedroom in the Konoha town at the opposite end of the forest. The shadows splintered apart like a ragged cape, revealing the figure of Alucard holding her master firmly but kindly. Alucard slowly lowered her master onto the room's only bed. She grinned at her master's sleeping face before frowning as she surveyed the apartment. "What a terrible, shameful place. My master deserves so much more than this. Maybe I can make this place much more appropriate," she thought, but first things first. A smirk settled on her vampire face as she giggled sadistically to herself. "There are no other occupants in the apartment complex, so I can safely assume they left because they did not want to live near my master. The only other person who lives here must be the owner of the building, as I sense his presence a few floors below. She phased through the floors silently until she reached the floor where the owner lived. She stalked down the hallways, turned a corner, and knocked several times before a man in his 30s opened the door. His shoulder-length black hair was pushed down against his head, and his black eyes said, "What do you want now, demon brat dash?" The man stopped talking when he noticed that a girl with long black hair, dressed entirely in white, had taken the place of the blonde brat who lived several stories above him. Her eyes were red, but they were much brighter than Yuhi Korean eyes, and they had a more sinister gleam to them. He didn't know who the girl was, but based on the expensiveness of her attire, it was clear that she was of aristocratic descent. "How may I be of assistance, Oju-sama?" he said courteously and amiably. After becoming accustomed to her telepathic abilities, Alucard resisted the urge to frown at the man in front of her. She wanted to kill him right away, but she needed him alive for the time being. Perhaps her master wouldn't mind if she had a snack, once his use was no longer necessary. "Yes," Alucard started. "I was hoping we could discuss the ownership of this building," she said. The owner said in a bewildered tone, "What do you mean?" Alucard raised her hand and touched the man's head with her finger. She whispered, her eyes a dark crimson, "You are going to invite me to your room, and you are going to bring me the deed to this apartment complex." Her eyes flashed crimson as a sinister chuckle escaped her lips as she used her telepathic abilities to forcefully close the door behind her. Outside the room, it was silent for several long moments before a brief sound of pain was heard, and then it was silenced. "Yes, of course, please come in, I shall bring you the deed," the man said hollowly, his eyes blank as they shone a dull red color. When Naruto woke up the following morning, he groaned as the sun shone on his whiskered face. He opened his eyes and glared at the sunlight coming into his room. He then got up and yawned slowly. He scratched his head, and then the events of the previous night hit him like a ton of bricks. He frantically searched the room for any sign that anything had happened the night before. Unfortunately, he was unable to locate anything. The blonde frowned and glanced at his palm. "Was it all a dream?" he said. "Was that girl even real?" A quiet voice next to him whispered, "I can assure you, master, that I am quite real, for if I wasn't, then how could I be standing in front of you?" The blonde blinked, turned his head, and his eyes were assaulted by red. He blinked quickly, leaned back, and saw the girl from last night. Her face was inches from his, and her red eyes were the reason his vision was obscured by red. She was so close that until he leaned back, the only thing he could really see was the color of her eyes. The female did not move from her spot, but she did give the blonde a big smile. Slowly, as though he was still unsure that she was real, Naruto said, "Alucard?" The first thing Alucard said was, "Yes, master?" Instead of answering right away, Naruto's thoughts were on what had transpired the previous evening when he blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "What are you?" he inquired simply, letting it be known that he was never subtle. "I am a vampire and a monster master," Alucard replied with a twisted smile. Blinking, Naruto said, "Vampire?" in confusion. "Yes," Alucard nodded eagerly, purring. The blonde 7-year-old said, "Then, why aren't you burning in the sunlight, you standing right in front of it?" It was accurate. The girl was standing squarely in the line of the sun. With a note of arrogance in her voice, Alucard responded to her master's question with a small laugh. "I am a special vampire master. I have an immunity to all the weaknesses a normal vampire would have. At best, sunlight is but a minor annoyance to me." she said. Prove it, show me your fangs, Naruto said, raising an eyebrow at her. He did recall her tasting his blood the previous evening, but that didn't prove she was a true vampire. Alucard responded with a broad smile that showed off her pointed teeth. Naruto gazed at her fangs with wide eyes, and he could tell the difference between fake and real teeth. To begin, when cleaned, fake teeth were less bright than real ones, and they usually stayed the same color. He could also detect scents with his nose, such as the smell of rubber, metal, or even wood, depending on the material they were made of. The fact that Alucard's teeth did not smell like any of them, however, indicated that they were genuine vampire fangs. Naruto muttered, "You really are a vampire." Alucard nodded while keeping a smile on her face. Naruto carefully raised his arm and extended his hand toward Alucard. He paused to check whether she would object, but she didn't. Instead, she stayed there with the same broad smile and her scarlet eyes fixed on his. After swallowing, Naruto put his palm on Alucard's cheek. It was chilly, but it felt reassuring to him. The blonde had rarely touched Alucard back when she was serving Integra, so she relished the moment when she felt a hand on her chest and opened her eyes to see her master's other hand resting on her chest. Alucard closed her eyes and leaned into the blonde's touch, snuggling into her master's touch. "No heartbeat," he said to her. The no-life queen, feeling playful, put her arms around her new master and murmured in the blonde's ear, "Why, my new master is so frisky and perverted. All you had to do was ask master if you wanted to experience a woman's body." She instantly sensed her master's shame as his 7-year-old face turned a beautiful shade of scarlet, his blue eyes trembling sweetly. "And no! Why, you got it all wrong. I was just curious if you had a heartbeat," she said. Alucard laughed at her master, who was a lot of fun to make fun of and torment. She would love spending time with him. A while later there was a relaxed calm. Alucard was happy to hold her master, and Naruto relished her embrace. Her boy was cold and heartless, but he still liked being held by her. Her presence was pleasant to him, and he wouldn't give it for anything. "Alucard," Naruto started, drawing her attention. "Last night you said you would never abandon me, that you would remain by my side until the end, that you would stick by me no matter what. Did you mean it?" "I meant every single word, master," Alucard replied with a sincere smile, pressing her cheek against her master's hair. Naruto, pleased with Alucard's response, inquired, "After I went to sleep, what else happened last night?" "Well, after you heeded my advice and rested, I took you straight home, and proceeded to negotiate with the owner of this apartment complex. Congratulations, by the way, on being the new owner, master," Naruto interrupted. "How did you get him to agree to that?" "The guy's an asshole." And Alucard smiled. Her response was, "I have my ways." "You killed him, didn't you?" Naruto asked, staring. "Maybe," she replied right away. Naruto stared once more before abruptly shrugging and saying, "Like I said, he was an asshole anyway." Continue. "After that, I summoned my familiars and began to clean the apartment. Familiars?" Naruto interrupted again. Alucard gestured to an open door that led to the corridor. Naruto turned to see a big black dog with several eyes strolling down the hall while holding a trash bag in its teeth. "I'm not going to ask," Naruto muttered as he watched. "I set about looking for a place to sleep after my familiars started cleaning the apartment, but nothing suited me, so I decided to sleep next to you until sunrise, master." She meant. She searched everywhere that was dark enough, but nothing really fit her. She looked for something that looked like a coffin, but sadly, Nothing in the building could be used as a makeshift coffin. She could have built one, but she was too lazy that night to do so. She wished she didn't have to leave her coffin behind before she left this world, but what can you do? Because she had few other options, she chose to share a bed with her master. In addition, she found the warmth of her master to be pleasant, and she found it amusing that her little master was so needy when he slept. With his face a shade of scarlet, Naruto cried out, "Wait! You slept in the same bed as me." "Yes, master, I also recall you being extremely clingy during the night," replied Alucard. The blonde took a big breath, regained his calm, and asked, "Was that all you did during the night?" Wondering what more she did, Naruto's flush intensified, causing the blonde to glance down in shame. Her response was, "That was all, master. Okay, I should get dressed and prepare breakfast," Naruto said with a nod. After saying, "You tidy up, master, I shall prepare breakfast," Alucard appeared to glide across the room and into the hallway. The door behind her closed, and she proceeded to the kitchen, where she promptly got to work preparing breakfast for her little master. She was relieved that she could cook. She ate a number of chefs during her lifetime, some of whom were obviously innocent and sinless, but she felt that 2 or 3 of them had committed sins and or horrible crimes because she could still feel their souls inside of her. About 40 minutes later, she felt her master walk into the room. By then, Alucard had already set the table, and a royal breakfast was waiting for her young master to eat it. As she entered the room, she saw that her master was wearing a white shirt with a red swirl on it, just like the one she had on her gloves, and blue shorts. She scowled in her mind at his outfit, thinking that once he finished breakfast, she would have to fix that. As he gazed at the food in front of him, Naruto whispered, "Alucard, you didn't need to go this far." One dish featured 3 sunny side-up eggs, another a dozen bacon strips with buttered toast beside them, and the final one a big stack of pancakes. A tall glass of orange juice was placed off to the side. Alucard's first response was, "My master deserves only the best." Naruto sat down and started eating the breakfast that had been prepared for him. He paused for a moment, then resumed eating at a slightly faster pace. After a minute or two, the blonde child was drinking the orange juice entirely, leaving the other plates empty save for crumbs. "That was amazing," Naruto said, wiping his lips. Alucard answered, "I am pleased you think so, master," and she smiled with satisfaction while bowing slightly. After giving the vampire girl a smile, Naruto scowled a little and said, "Why didn't you eat anything?" "I'm a vampire, master, all I require is blood," she said, laughing. The spiky-haired blonde said, "Blood, huh?" He reached into his pocket and took out the kunai he had saved from the previous evening, setting it at the base of his palm and digging it into his flesh. Suppressing a hiss of pain, he took the kunai out and extended his bleeding hand to the girl with the scarlet eyes. Alucard's gaze was fixed on Naruto's bleeding hand. She approached her master slowly and tenderly grasped his hand, bringing it to her lips and letting her tongue slip out of its restraints before licking the blonde's bloody hand. Because of his lifestyle, the 7-year-old was not as innocent as many believed. Although his physique and, to some extent, his mentality were still that of a youngster, he normally had the thinking of a preteen. Alucard paused after drinking enough blood and leaned back. "Thank you for the meal, master," she replied, releasing the blonde's hand. Naruto nodded absently as he watched his hand heal. When it was fully healed, the blonde got up and headed for the door, intending to leave the apartment. However, he felt Alucard's hand on his shoulder and, After giving her a confused look, he chose to listen to what she had to say. Master, before you leave, I suggest a change of attire. I will not allow my master to walk in such filthy clothes when you deserve better, she said. These are the only clothes I have, Naruto muttered, scowling. With a snap of her fingers, the shadows surged up and covered Naruto's body, causing him to yell in astonishment. A second later, the shadows split, revealing Naruto's new appearance. Fret not, I shall take care of it, Alucard said. Alucard scowled as she observed it, saying, No, it doesn't suit you, master. And then she snapped her hands, causing the shadows to rise and cover the blonde's body once more. He was wearing a white dress shirt, a black suit jacket, and black pants. He also had a crimson tie and a black hat on top of his head. The blonde was wearing completely different clothing when the shadows parted again. This time, she was wearing robes, which included a light gray long-sleeved hooded shirt with a dark brown leather wrapping that was sleeveless, pants, leather arm bracers, leather calf braces, a white sleeveless surcoat, and leather shoes, Jedi adventure robes from Star Wars, The Force Unleashed. The shadow rose and engulfed the blonde again as Alucard hummed. It's good, perhaps when you age more, master, perhaps a simple yet elegant yukata shall suffice. They parted instantly, and Naruto was seen wearing a crimson-red yukata. The clothing was decorated with what appeared to be several yellow swirls that resembled whirlpools, and they were arranged so elegantly, and in such a way that Naruto could have been mistaken for a prince, which he was, technically. Perfect, chirped Alucard. With a deadpan look on his face, Naruto asked, She called this simple? Given how regal it appeared, this yukata would likely be worth a substantial fortune. He thanked Alucard for her assistance and started to leave the room, but he paused and gave her a questioning look as if she were going to follow him. As Naruto said, You're coming with me? Why, of course, master. I'm not going to let you walk around alone in this disgusting village full of worms, Alucard said with a little smile. Naruto scowled and said, But if anything, they might try to take you away from me. A second later, her form was gradually blending with Naruto's own shadow until she had fully blended with it. They can try, master, but I do have a method to follow you without anyone ever noticing, she said. Naruto asked, blinking owlishly. Alucard? Yes, master? The voice of Alucard echoed in his mind. After glancing around for a while, Naruto turned to face his shadow and said, You're talking to me in your head, aren't you? He pondered. Correct, master, she responded. I understand, Naruto reflected. This was really helpful since not only would she be with him nearly all the time, but they could be in constant communication. Alucard, you might hear some of the villagers glare at me and whisper insults at me when we walk around the village. Do not do anything to him, he said. But master, Naruto concluded sternly, no buts, insults, whispers, and glares are nothing I cannot handle. Insults are just words, and glares are just eyes that gaze upon me. They cannot do any true harm, but if they try to inflict physical harm, you are free to do with them as you see fit. He saw that Alucard had the most bone-chilling grin on her face without even having to see her. At last she answered, Of course, master. After nodding in response to her response, Naruto left the apartment building and continued to stroll through Konoha. Along the way, a number of the villagers would glare and mutter nasty insults at the blonde. The villagers were taken aback by Naruto's attire and assumed he had stolen it from a nobleman. Naturally, Naruto ignored them. But whilst Naruto was happy to ignore them, Alucard wasn't. Occasionally, the blonde's shadow would writhe intense, giving the impression that they were about to attack and murder the villagers, but they refrained, albeit only slightly. The several shinobi in the crowd noticed, but they prudently decided not to ask any further questions, instead attributing it to a Nara keeping watch over the blonde. The people were unaware of this. When Naruto arrived in the park a few hours later, around noon, he could only watch with envy as children his own age played together, including a girl with pink hair and another with pale blonde hair. His jealousy increased as he noticed the parents of those children watching with joyful and affectionate faces. He wished someone would look at him with eyes like those rather than the typical contemptuous and hateful ones. Through their mental connection, he heard Alucard say, "It's okay, master." A moment later, he felt arms encircling him and his small body being pressed against another. A soft voice then whispered in his ear, "I am here, master. I am all that you require. Those offspring of the filth you see before you will only drag you down. You reside on a pedestal that they will never attain, master. Such filthy dogs are not worthy to call themselves your friends. Friends are beneath you, master. Do not bother with such pointless things," he said. "You're right, I don't need any of them, you're all I need," Naruto said, turning quickly around and continuing to walk down the street without turning around. Naruto stared at the scene for a moment longer before he looked into Alucard's loving eyes. Alucard smiled as she became one with her master's shadow. "Before I had a master who could command me to slay dozens without remorse, a fledgling who loved only me. Now I have a master who will love only me, a master who will not be held back by attachments or loyalties to other causes, although the only loyalties he may have will be for the Sandaime Hokage and his Ichiraku family. But his love will belong to me, a master who does not despise me, a master who will not imprison me, a master who will love me, and me alone. Truly, this makes me happy." Alucard thought as Naruto's shadow developed a large grin with two eyes staring at his back with love and devotion. "No one shall take away my master, he is my master, and only I shall decide who is worthy of him. Those who try to take my master away and want to be with my master shall have to get through me." Naruto's shadow swiftly returned to normal as they started to reach a more populous area. Finally, when she focused more on her master's surroundings, did Alucard exhibit possessiveness? In order to leave a bloody smear on the floor, she needed one of these stupid villagers to attempt to hurt her master. Thankfully, or regrettably, depending on who you ask, a villager did find the strength to attempt to attack Naruto in the afternoon. Alucard promptly instructed her master to lead the man into a remote location, and the blonde boy complied. The villager, oblivious to his imminent demise, had followed. When he approached the blonde, Naruto's shadow had changed into Alucard, with her crimson eyes flashing evilly and her lips smiling broadly. Her right arm had changed into a familiar hellhound, and the villager was quickly eaten. He had discovered Naruto waiting far down the lane. There were no further attacks on Naruto's person once he had left the isolated alley and resumed strolling the streets. However, the no-life queen herself was cleaning her master's bedroom while the blonde was at his apartment enjoying dinner that Alucard had made. As she fluffed her master's pillow, Alucard noticed her handiwork. "Perfect," she said, gazing at the spotlessly clean room. "Walter, eat your heart out." She smiled, picturing his shocked face and the words he would say to her. As she pictured him replying, "You mean to tell me you could have cleaned the estate better than me? If that's the case, why didn't you help at times?" She would have said, "Meh, I find it amusing watching you fret over cleaning the estate." Unfortunately, she wouldn't be missing Walter for very long. Alucard was happy with her work and was about to leave her master's room when she noticed something that truly caught her off guard. Her coffin, which she had used ever since she turned vampire, was standing in front of her, right next to the door. She blinked as she noticed the sticky note on it, then shrugged and read it. Sincerely, Shinigami, I thought you might have desired this, but it wasn't simple to get. She arched an eyebrow at the letter and its contents, shrugged casually, and dismissed it as the Shinigami being exceptionally giving. She mentally noted that she would be extra wary if the Shinigami continued to do her any favors. She hummed as she searched for a suitable location for her coffin. Maybe she could put it in the apartment's darkest area, but there were several dark areas, and she wasn't sure which was the worst. Maybe her master would know. Alucard was determined to ask her master the question, so she hurried to get there in time to see him put his plate in the sink. The blonde appeared to be about to wash it, but Alucard stopped him in his tracks and said, Master, it's not your place to wash the dishes, please allow me, but I always wash my dishes. Naruto scowled at her, grumbling gently. Alucard laughed at this point. That's because you did not have anyone to do it for you. I shall take care of your basic needs and such. There is no need for you to bother yourself with such trivial things, said Alucard. Naruto scowled again, but he gave up. While he was sitting on the couch, he did complain to himself. Alucard finished cleaning the dishes quickly, and she positioned herself behind her master right away. May I impose a question, master? She requested. Naruto responded. You just did, but I suppose I can let you ask a second question, as he grabbed the TV remote control and started to play with it. I was simply wondering where the darkest part of the apartment was, Alucard said, grinning at her master's statement. Naruto began to hum. The darkest part, huh? Come to think of it, there was always this one part of the apartment that was always blocked off. I believe I heard some of the people who used to live say how this building was the former TNI department before it was decommissioned. Why was it decommissioned? Something about not having enough cells for future inmates, or whatever. I never bothered learning anything more about it, remarked Naruto. Alucard whispered. I see, a smile slowly spreading over her lips. It seemed like the ideal location for her coffin. Why do you ask? Oh, nothing, just thinking it's the perfect place for my coffin, she replied. Alucard confirmed Naruto's question. Isn't a coffin where you vampires sleep? I see, so I take it you'll be using your coffin to sleep in from now on, he said. Is Master upset that I will not be sharing his bed with him any more? Alucard asked teasingly, unable to resist the chance to make fun of her master at that precise moment. And no! Why, you got it all wrong, besides, it was only for one night. And I didn't know you were there at the time, Naruto said, flushed scarlet right away. Did not stop you from snuggling me, master, Naruto replied, averting his gaze. Shut up. Fret not, master. While I shall reside in my coffin for most nights, that does not mean that I shall neglect you should you wish for me to sleep beside you, Alucard stated, giggling at her master before placing her hands on his shoulders. Naruto chose to switch on the TV for late-night programming instead of responding. Even though she was a monster, her master still wanted her to be so close to him, even trusting her in his sleep, which is interesting. If things continued as they were, he would be her favorite master, if he wasn't already way up there with Integra. Alucard smiled as she was able to sense the emotions her master had almost masterfully hidden. She also sensed her master's slight relief at her words. She turned back and got ready to bring her coffin into the section of the apartment that was walled off. Good night, master, she said. She heard her master say, "Good night, Alucard," and she paused for a moment. No one had ever wished her a good night before, so she smiled broadly. Yes, he was undoubtedly becoming her favorite master of all time. She swiftly got her coffin and made her way through the darkness and shadows into the apartment's block-off area. She effortlessly broke through a weak ceiling barrier, and her form and coffin appeared. When she first arrived, she smiled. The room was large, and several cell doors were open, each with rusted bars that were slightly bent. There was a dark mist that seemed to be present, and there was blood on the walls and floor. She could hear faint, far-off echoes that sounded like screaming, and she smiled when she realized that these were actually the echoes of the past. There were broken chairs all over the place, and there were several torn and burned books on the floor. She thought it wasn't too bad, but she would have to do some cleaning and deal with the reverberating voices since they were getting annoying. She called her friends right away and told them to clean up the area while another half would deal with the reverberating screams. She worked for the Helsing family, who were experts at vampire hunting, but they also performed exorcisms even though she was not skilled in them. As a result, she understood the fundamentals of exorcising any residual spirits. She placed her coffin in the center of the room, opened it, and lay inside, certain that her familiars would clean and thoroughly exorcise the space. A few moments later, her scarlet eyes gleamed in the darkness of the coffin before slowly closing. She was eager for the next day. As her master got ready for his first day at the academy, Alucard watched with interest. Her blonde master was dressed in the same style of yukata that she had given him a year prior, but this time it had a different design. This time, the yukata's design featured a huge array of storm clouds that circled and were concentrated around the back of the building. The building was black with crimson trimmings, and the storm clouds were all light blue in color. They were also sporadically located on the front of the building, but they weren't very numerous. In reference to her master, the youngster, who is now 8 years old, was just steadily eating his meal. Compared to when she first met him, the boy's motions were more elegant and somewhat more fluid. After a full year, Alucard was pleasantly delighted by her new life and her master. Since the night they first met, both of their lives had improved as a result. Alucard had naturally questioned why her master was acting like an idiot, to which the blonde replied that if the villagers discovered his true intelligence, they would attack him because they were afraid the demon was growing too strong. She had observed that during the first few weeks with her master, he pretended to be an idiot among the villagers and hardly ever displayed intelligence to anyone other than those he trusted. Alucard contended that since she would defend him until the very end, he wouldn't have to be concerned about attacks on his person. After a while, her master managed to emerge from his shell and show the other villagers who he really was. Attacks on his person have since increased in frequency and audacity, but the villagers were never able to approach her master within 6 feet because she used her power over the darkness to either scare them away or almost kill them with heart attacks. She had more enjoyment when a shinobi was with the group since it allowed her to play a little more. When they followed him, she would tell her master to go into a remote, dark place so she could deal with them. Once there, she would emerge and murder them swiftly but brutally as well. Given all of the attacks on him, Naruto had rapidly grown quite aloof for his age. While he did become more relaxed around the Ichiraka family and the Sandaime Hokage when he visited, he remained somewhat aloof from them. He only ever really let himself unwind around Alucard, and she knew that her master trusted her more than anything else. Alucard was thrilled that her master trusted her so much because Naruto only really opened up with her. Her master wouldn't be prevented from forming weak bonds like friendship or anything similar, and although he could appreciate the sense of camaraderie, that was the only concession she was prepared to make. Her master would benefit greatly from having allies, ideally strong ones, those with a lot of influence, etc. But she would not permit friendships or other attachments because she felt that they held one back. She would make sure her master made decisions without hesitation and took command right away. Friendships and other attachments would soften him, leaving him vulnerable to foes both now and in the future. In addition, her master just needed herself as a friend. She needed no other friends. Due to his aloof attitude toward everyone, he became well known among the village's children of his age. The majority of the children thought he was the coolest kid, but some of the girls developed rapid crushes on the blonde, much to the chagrin of the locals. The blonde even attracted the attention of two popular girls, Sakura and Ino. Naturally, the blonde chose to ignore them most of the time and never engage with them, which naturally increased the visibility of their affections on him. Alucard was amused and annoyed by it. She was amused because she knew that if her master had kept wearing the mask of idiocy, they would never have given him any attention, and she was annoyed because they were attempting to win her master's love. She would not tolerate this, and would have preferred to kill them, but Naruto had made it clear that she could not kill anyone unless they were attempting to harm him physically or were an enemy. Even though she was not allowed to kill them, her master did not mention frightening them. Thinking of the screams they made when she telepathically gave them nightmares made her feel sadistic. The two girls would rush to their parents' room and cry about how many dogs with many eyes were going to devour them. Naturally, there was also the period when she would lurk in their closets and terrorize them with ominous murmurs and the appearance that blood was seeping from them, as well as a ghoul scuttling out of their closet. The entire village was literally awakened by their cries of fear. It would be extremely suspicious if they continued to have nightmares, so Alucard made it a point to give them one once a month at various times. Naturally, most people described them as having nightmares as soon as they heard the reason why they were screaming in such dread. Another reason is that prior to his fame, those two girls had apparently forgotten that they had started numerous fights with the blonde, and they even encouraged other children to band together against him. When her master found out what she was doing, he simply shrugged it off and said it was okay because it wasn't physical harm. Normally, the librarians would have thrown him out as soon as he walked in, but with Alucard by his side, he never had to worry about that happening again. She would either use her hypnosis on them to make sure her master was always permitted entry, or if they insulted her master, she would put them in a terrifying illusion that would cause them to go into cardiac arrest. Naturally, she was unable to do more than that because her master had still prohibited her from killing them. It's a terrible shame. The only noteworthy items were books that, surprisingly, contained some combat styles and a single chakra exercise called leaf balancing. Unfortunately, because the library was primarily for civilians, it did not contain any shinobi material that could be used to help her master gain strength. If Naruto wanted to learn more, he would have to wait until he was in the academy to gain access to the shinobi library. Of course, he could only enter the section meant for academy students. Knowing that clan heirs would receive special preparation for the academy in the form of their parents, Alucard offered to sneak into the library and get him some study materials. Naruto accepted and gave her instructions to gather some basic materials intended for genins, but he also told her to exercise extra caution. The 3 C-rank jutsu were Fire Style, Grand Fireball, Water Style, Water Clones, and Wind Style, Wind Palm. She also got her master the materials he needed, including some basic D-rank jutsu, a churka control exercise called tree walking, and 3 C-rank jutsu. The D-rank jutsu included transformation, substitution, and basic clones, which her master couldn't perform for jack shit. After mastering the techniques for training, Naruto swiftly established a training schedule with Alucard's assistance. At precisely 10 in the morning, the blonde would perform warm-up exercises, which typically included push-ups, sit-ups, and 3 laps around the training field they were using at the time. At noon, they would eat lunch, during which Naruto would consume either ramen or Alucard's homemade lunches, and the vampire would drink his blood. The blonde had already mastered the leaf balancing exercise, though it took him almost a year, and was now working on the tree walking exercise. Surprisingly, it was progressing far more quickly than the leaf balancing exercise. After lunch, Naruto would then practice the jutsu that Alucard had borrowed, and improve his chakra control. The blonde could confidently state that he would perform the jutsu better than a genin, even though his skill level did not match that of a chunin. Lastly, as the sun was starting to set, Naruto and Alucard would engage in a brief spar so that the blonde could gain more fighting experience. Alucard was initially hesitant to fight her master because she was certain that he would suffer serious injuries in the process. Nevertheless, her master was persuaded to engage in a brief spar with her after they came to an agreement whereby Alucard would avoid his blows, and if the blonde managed to hit her, she would take her turn and attack him while he dodged. In a way, it was a game of tag that they made for training purposes. Naruto was easily able to equal a genin in skill, but he would lose hands down to a chunin because the blonde was not yet at that level. By sparring with Alucard, Naruto gained valuable experience, and the blonde adopted Alucard's fighting habits, including occasionally taunting him and appearing to develop a sadistic side that was almost identical to hers. He also expressed great rage at someone who was unable to give him a proper fight when he expected better of them. It all began when Naruto protected a Hyuga heir from being bullied by some children his own age. He expected the kids to be able to support all of their bluster because they were harassing a Hyuga his own age, so he immediately confronted them. He called them weaklings, which infuriated them, and they attacked him. A few moments later, the group was on the ground, moaning in agony, and Naruto was stomping on the leader's head, his eyes full of anger and disappointment as he described how pitifully weak they were. Of course he had to stop because another Hyuga had stepped in and called out for the Hyuga girl he had aided. However, he could tell by looking at her that the girl must not have had a backbone. He hated people who picked on the weak, but he also hated people who had training but never retaliated, which meant she had a weak will and a soft heart. In the kind of world they lived in, something that will kill you, Alucard felt proud of her master that day, but she also wanted to tear the same Hyuga girl to pieces. Ever since he had saved her from those bullies, Alucard had seen the girl stalking her master on several occasions. When she told her master about it, Naruto simply told her to ignore her because she was not causing any harm, but if she did try anything, Alucard could do with her whatever she wanted. She was rather happy with her master's choice. Luckily, or regrettably, depending on who you ask, the Hyuga girl only stalked her master, which somewhat upset Alucard. Alucard did observe one thing though, and that was that her master was much more forgiving of her than her previous masters. He gave her more freedom, but he could also be harsh and very commanding with her. This was how they spent the remainder of their year together, training, hanging out, or just relaxing until something interesting happened. The fact that True Integra was forgiving and occasionally gave her freedom was rather nice because her past masters had either been nasty to her or had given her very little freedom at all. It's also important to remember that Alucard spent a number of nights with her master. Occasionally, she would stay up late with him to watch TV shows and the odd scary movie. They would do this until her master fell asleep on her lap, at which point Alucard would either carry him to his bed or just let him stay there while she slept next to him. That resulted in some rather humorous awakenings the next morning. Alucard also became more possessive and defensive of her blonde master. She would try to stop the urge to annihilate anyone who even appeared to be about to glare at her master. This included girls her master's age who were starting to think her master was cute. It took all of her strength not to just show up and scare them so much that they would go into cardiac arrest. She would utterly destroy anyone who thought they were worthy of her master or who thought they could hurt her master without facing any repercussions. In her opinion, no one was worthy of her master, no one was worthy of setting their dirty eyes upon him, and no one was even worthy of licking the dirt that her master stepped on. It took all of Alucard's self-control not to rip into the masses of people staring at her master during her walks through the village most of the time. She wanted to maim, slaughter, rip out their organs, bisect them, and hear their cries of horror and terror as she tore them apart piece by piece. Even now she could picture her laughing cruelly and gleefully as the people of Konoha all screamed as their limbs were torn apart, their bones making sickening cracks and snaps as they broke, their heads being crushed, and pieces of their brains scattering everywhere, their still pumping hearts in her hands, only for her to eat it in front of their dying eyes, and to bathe in their blood as she slowly killed them in any prolonged and agonizing way possible. She had all of it, and so much more on her mind. She believed that her master was perched on a pedestal that the gods themselves had made, one that easily reached and transcended the heavens. She believed that the villagers were envious of her master because they knew of his potential, she was certain of it, and they desired the power he would eventually acquire for themselves. She refused to give him up to them. She was the only person her master needed or required in his life. He just needed her, and she refused to let them do as they pleased with him. The sound of her master rising from his seat at the table startled Alucard out of her memory lane. She saw him take up his plate and start cleaning the dishes. Her master was also adamant about that. He wanted to help her with other tasks around the apartment complex. When she questioned why, he merely replied that he couldn't let her handle the responsibility of keeping the entire place clean. As a result, they swiftly reached an agreement. Alucard would take care of cooking, mopping, and dusting while her familiars kept the rest of the complex tidy. Her master would take care of the laundry, sweeping, dishwashing, and cleaning his room and bathroom. It was encouraging to see her master so mature at such a young age. Naruto stated, "Alucard, get ready to leave," after he had completed cleaning his dishes. As she approached the door, Alucard smiled and said, "I'm ready when you are, master," with a hint of excitement building within of her. Shortly after, Naruto entered the porch and hurriedly put on his shoes. He gave Alucard a small, affectionate smile, and his eyes were warm, warmth reserved for the monstrous vampire in front of him. "Then let's go, Alucard. I'm curious as to how the academy is," the blonde said, his eyes brightening a little. "I am curious as well, master. I wonder if this shinobi academy shall live up to my expectations," Alucard replied, grinning at her master. Naruto said, The sooner we get moving, the sooner our curiosity shall be sated. With a slight smile on his face at the prospect of going to the academy and learning things he was not yet able to learn, like the history of the shinobi and old legends. He could have easily had Alucard get some books about these topics, but in the end, he decided that gaining some strength was more important. Now that he was at the academy, he could concentrate on both. Sensing her master's thoughts and his excitement, Alucard smiled back. Her form started to blend with her master's shadows, and soon she was inside his shadow. Naruto grinned affectionately at his shadow before turning to face the door leading to the outside of his room. His face instantly changed into a stern, emotionless expression, and his eyes took on a chilly expression that would freeze the flames of hell themselves. The blonde exited his apartment room with the deft movement of a predator, locking the door behind him. He swiftly left the apartment complex and started walking to the academy. A scarlet red eye emerged from Naruto's shadow and glared at the villagers with pure hatred and anger. The eye quickly vanished, leaving the villagers unaware of what had happened. He coldly returned the glares that the numerous villagers were giving him. The villagers felt shivers run down their spines and either quickly looked away from the blonde or they shuddered visibly, and stiffly resumed what they were doing. Yumino Iruka grinned subtly as he hurriedly arranged his files on the pupils he would undoubtedly be instructing until graduation. He had always wanted to teach at an academy since he thought it was important to educate the younger shinobi the skills they would need in their everyday lives. Although their Jonin sensei would handle the rest, the brown-haired Chunin was thrilled because, quite honestly, this was his first time teaching and he hoped he could meet his students' expectations. He could say with pride and great honor that he helped prepare them. Iruka wore the typical Konoha Chunin attire, and he had tan skin, dark eyes, brown hair in a spiky ponytail, and a horizontal scar across his nose. He was accompanied by a white-haired man wearing the traditional Konoha Chunin attire, with his hide bandana knotted over his head. This man was Mizuki, his best buddy. "You excited to teach the brats, Iruka?" Mizuki inquired, grinning wryly. Iruka laughed. "Yeah, I can't wait to meet the kids. To be honest, I'm a bit nervous myself, but I believe I'm up to the task. What about you, Mizuki?" he inquired. "Meh, depends really," said Mizuki with a shrug. "So who do we have in our class anyway?" he said. "Wow, it seems our class comprises mostly of clan heirs," Iruka exclaimed in surprise as he glanced over his files, taking in the names and images of the kids he knew would be in his class. "Really?" Mizuki inquired, startled. Iruka replied, "Yes, the Hyuga, Inuzuka, Aburame, Akimichi, Nara, Yamanaka, and Uchiha clans have students their heirs attending, with the rest being civilians. Well, I'll be," Mizuki thought. "Looks like we have our work cut out for us, right, Iruka?" he questioned. However, there was a pause for a few seconds before Mizuki turned to face Iruka, who was staring at a file in his hands with vacant eyes. "Iruka?" Mizuki asked, but he was still not heard. With a small frown, he gave Iruka a quick elbow to the ribs, which made the teacher with the brown hair start and turn to face him in shock. "What caught your attention so much that you were ignoring me for the past several seconds?" Mizuki inquired. "It's the next student we will be having who caught my attention," Iruka said slowly, scowling. Mizuki asked, idly tinkering with a pencil. "Really? Who?" "Uzumaki Naruto." That one word was enough to silence the entire classroom. Iruka kept his expression calm as he stared at the name in front of him, while Mizuki, standing next to him, held his pencil hard till it broke. Mizuki's eyes were staring at nothing and something at the same time. The QB brat, huh? Mizuki whispered, his voice tinged with animosity. Yeah, Irika muttered, oblivious to the tone his best friend was using. He was shocked to learn that the Uzumaki had once been a happy and carefree child, always playing tricks and the like, but that one day everything just stopped and the boy turned cold toward everyone. He did soften a little when he was with the Sadame and the Ichiraku family, but he still seemed distant, even toward them. Since he knew enough about sealing to know that a scroll does not turn into a kunai once the kunai is sealed, he was honestly unsure of how to feel about the blonde Jinchuriki. However, whenever he heard the name Uzumaki Naruto, all he could think of was the image of the terrifying Kyubi no Kitsune, the enormous fox that snarled down at the village, destroying everything with its 9 tails, the same creature that killed his parents. Even though he detested the fox, he was aware that the boy the beast was sealed into wasn't the fox. Nevertheless, he couldn't help but exercise caution. He would wait to pass judgment on the boy until he met him. He wanted to meet Naruto before drawing any judgments about him. After almost an hour, students started to arrive in the classroom. There were civilian kids and clan heirs among them, and each student entered with odd looks on their faces. They were all eager to train and become shinobi, and Irika smiled as he observed them all. He was genuinely honored to be able to instruct them, and he would have his work cut out for him as he observed the clan heirs in the room. He scowled a little, but then he noticed a single student sitting in the back, oblivious to the other students chatting nearby. His spiky blonde hair reached below his shoulders, and his bangs brushed his forehead. He had 2 sets of whisker marks on his cheeks, and his cold blue eyes looked around the room with a chilly expression, indifference to the events going on around him. Gulping, Irika kept staring at the blonde after realizing with a start that the child with the icy expression in his eyes was Uzumaki Naruto. The blonde's eyes were so cold that it shocked and saddened him, and he felt a wave of guilt and shame wash over him. No child, much less an 8-year-old, should look like that. Irika learned another thing about the blonde from his lack of interest and concern for the other people in the room. If everyone in the room suddenly perished in the most horrifying and agonizing way possible, the blonde lad wouldn't even be fazed. At worst, he would simply blink and brush it aside. Irika attempted not to flinch when Naruto's eyes suddenly met his dark brown ones. If anything, his scowl deepened and his gaze grew colder, his eyebrows furrowing as he started to glare at the elder man. The gaze the blonde was throwing was enough to make even the Kyubi hesitate trying the blonde. Irika had never seen a youngster with such a chilly attitude and look before. Not even Uchiha Itachi was this cold. Irika's mouth went dry and he felt a chill go down his spine. The scarred man was able to sense the boy's chakra because to his chakra sensing talents, which were somewhat superior than those of a typical sensor. He had a lot of chakra, but it was tame and controlled, which surprised Irika. Irika also noticed that his chakra gave off a warm feeling, but that warmth was barely perceptible because of the indifference, and a cold feeling, though it was stronger. As anticipated, a lot of chakra was concentrated around the boy's stomach, and it was vile, darker, and sinister in nature. It was undoubtedly the Kyubi. But Irika scowled in perplexity as he observed something else. It felt wrong and unnatural. If the Kyubi's chakra had such a vile and evil feeling, then the energy he felt around the blonde was nothing but pure evil in both natures. It felt like a monster because it seemed to have a kill instinct. There was another strange type of energy surrounding the child with the blonde hair. It was dark, much darker, and more sinister than the Kyuubi's. But given how this energy was clinging to Naruto, it also appeared to shield the blonde. What perplexed Iruka the most, though, was the sense of death it exuded, almost as though it were dead, but somehow alive. It felt both alive and dead at the same moment, but the scarred Chunin was unsure how to describe it. As Miyazuki started roll call, Iruka continued to focus on the blonde while ignoring the rest of the class. All of a sudden, it seemed as though everyone in the room had disappeared, leaving just Iruka and Naruto to look into each other's eyes. In front of Iruka's eyes, Naruto's shadow suddenly rose and took on a humanoid shape. Before long, the face of a 14-year-old girl appeared behind the blonde, her arms protectively wrapped around Naruto's body, her long raven black hair falling to her waist, just below her back, her bangs covering her forehead, and her scarlet-red eyes staring at him with murder, bloodlust, and a hint of insanity. Her pupils were cat-like and appeared to be rippling outwards, and she was wearing a white business suit and a white hat. Two extremely sharp fangs glinted as her grin widened significantly, if that was possible, and her lips were pushed back into a mocking grin so big that it threatened to break her face. Iruka gazed. It was all he could do. He was paralyzed by fear and terror. His eyes were blazing scarlet red, and they were staring into his soul. Flashes of his death appeared in his mind, each one worse than the last. The images stopped, like glass breaking, and Iruka held his breath, wondering what would happen next. Iruka stopped his chakra subtly, then flared it, but nothing happened. Was this not a genjutsu? Iruka heard Naruto's voice for the first time abruptly. The blonde's voice was icy, heartless, aloof, and most importantly, merciless. It was odd because even though his voice was harsh and frigid, there was a tinge of warmth and affection in it. Alucard, even though it was just one word, it appeared like the girl holding the blonde knew what the blonde wanted. Without saying anything, the girl let go of the blonde and flashed Iruka a grin that betrayed her want to kill and bloodlust. Her lips opened, and she simply spoke 3 words. "You're dog shit." Having stated that, Iruka stared with sick curiosity as her arm changed into a substance that resembled a shadow before a big black dog that had the same eyes as her appeared out of nowhere. Iruka was hissed at by the black dog before it lunged. Iruka scooted back in his chair and gasped. His eyes were wide with terror, as he searched frantically for the dog that had vanished. He heard a voice beside him ask, "Iruka?" Iruka blinked and looked back to see his friend Mizuki and the rest of the class staring at him worriedly. They were whispering to each other about how strange he was and muttering to each other. After carefully examining the room and determining that nothing was amiss, he turned back to face his buddy and stated, "I'm fine, just continue on, Mizuki," while smiling reassuringly. Mizuki returned to roll call after giving his pal one more glance. Iruka looked at Naruto's form as his friend returned to work. The blonde child was still glaring at him, and Iruka saw that the blonde was shaking his head a little. Confused, Iruka chose to ignore it and reorganize his files, not realizing that his own shadow had fallen to the ground and that the top of it had lost its sharp point. Around the academy's yard, kids from all different courses were mingling. They were eating lunch, chatting with their friends, playing tag, gossiping, and doing other things. However, 3 students in particular did not participate in the activities. Aburame Shino, the heir of the Aburame clan, was a boy with black sunglasses that concealed the color of his eyes and a scarf covering the majority of his face. The brown-haired boy was examining a bug that was resting on his hand closely, ignoring the other kids in the process. Another was lying on the grass with his hair pulled back into a spiked ponytail, his eyes half-lidded as he looked up at the many clouds in the sky. Beside him was a chubby lad with swirl marks on his cheeks, and on top of his head was a pair of underwear. Going forward, the child was presently vigorously nibbling on a bag of chips without pausing in his consumption. Akimichi Choji and Nara Shikamaru, the heirs of the Akimichi and Nara clans, were these two sons. The blonde was sitting on the grass with his back against a tree, away from everyone else. He was eating a sandwich slowly, his posture guarded yet a little relaxed, and his expression was one of cold neutrality that made other children hesitant to approach him. However, he would have disregarded other children who approached him for two main reasons. One, he wouldn't have wasted time with them, and second, he was already occupied with someone else. Alucard countered, "But master, I am positive he was thinking negatively about you, and I would not stand for it." Alucard, he was not doing anything physically injurious. Your argument is flawed, Naruto said with a small sigh. But master, enough, Naruto interrupted. You almost went too far. I would have forgiven you for creating that illusion over Yumino-san, but I wouldn't have tolerated the whole situation where you were going to stab him in the back. We agreed that you would only kill people who would physically harm me, so I let you give Yamanaka-san and Haruno-san nightmares just because I trusted you wouldn't go too far. But you almost went too far with your actions in the classroom, Naruto said. After a prolonged period of silence, Alucard said in a quiet voice, "Forgive me, master. I will not allow it to happen again." Once he made sure no one was looking, Naruto allowed himself to smile a little. "Forgive me, Alucard. You know that I do not like taking such a stern approach with you, but should the villagers learn of you, they will try to take you away from me. I do not wish to be separated from you. Aside from the Hokage and the Ichiraku family, you are my most precious person, and you always will be," Naruto said, imagining the kind of expression that Alucard was wearing at the moment. After a few more moments of silence, it was broken when Alucard said, in a contented voice, "I understand, master. Just as I am your most precious person, you too hold a special place within this black heart of mine. I am your monster, just as you are my master. Truly, a monster like me does not deserve someone like you as my master. That and the affection that you display upon me, Alucard, in my eyes you will never be the monster you claim to be," Naruto whispered softly out loud. He didn't hear a response, but he knew that his words greatly pleased Alucard. He opened his eyes and looked down as he felt a hand grab his hand, and he saw that Alucard's hand was emerging from his shadow, her scarlet-red eyes staring at him with love and devotion, just as she had always done since she became his servant. Her eyes lingered on his figure before closing, and her hand responded in his shadow. Before closing his eyes and lying down on the grass, Naruto kept his gaze on the spot where Alucard's eyes had been. He sighed in dissatisfaction, thinking that if only he and Alucard were in a more private setting, he could enjoy her warm and cold embrace as he always did. His eyes looked at the different kids his age, all of them laughing joyfully and carelessly. He would have been jealous of them a year ago, but now? Even so, Alucard was essentially a constant in his life. She had supported him ever since she became his servant, and now he felt nothing as he looked at them. The only people he cared about were the Hokage, the Ikarakus, and Alucard. The Hokage and the Ikarakus did give him a few gifts on his birthday, but Alucard had made it her mission to make his 8th birthday one of the best. She had sneaked into several shops in the village and bought him a number of expensive items, including picture frames for him to put pictures in, sheets and blankets, A new TV set, the newest brand might be added, and pricey artwork. He had informed Alucard that she was under no obligation to provide him all of those things, but she had asserted that her master deserved them all and that she would have, somehow, bought him a mansion to live in if he had asked her to. All Naruto could do was grin and celebrate his birthday with his most valued companion. He had also made good use of those picture frames. He had multiple photos of himself with the Hokage and the Ichiraku family, but one was always with him. He reached into his pocket and took out a silver locket with a gold swirl on it, and then he opened it with a small, kind smile. There was a photo of him smiling broadly at the camera. Alucard was leaning her head over his shoulder and grinning broadly at the camera, flashing her fangs. Her scarlet-red eyes appeared to glow in the camera's lens. Next to the blonde, a voice remarked abruptly, "What are you staring at with such a smile?" Naruto scowled and clenched his locket slightly as he gazed at the person who had spoken to him. The girl had blonde hair, a clip holding her left bang to her side, and a small bang over her right eye. Her greenish-blue eyes gazed curiously at him as she grinned sweetly. Naruto frowned a little more. How could he not recognize this person? This girl, whose name was Yamanaka Ino, was Haruno Sakura's best friend and a potential suitor for his affections. He had a crush on her ever since he stopped acting like a fool. Naruto muttered in a monotone, "Nothing that should concern you, Yamanaka-san." And in the back of his mind, he heard Alucard snarl possessively, "I was just trying to speak with you is all." Ino pouted. "Don't be like that, Naruto-kun," she said. Did this girl really believe she was playing tricks on him? Naruto gazed. He was aware that she was attempting to approach him, but he refused to comply because he didn't need or want to be closer to her or anybody else in general. "Go away," Naruto said in his typical monotone, with a tinge of animosity in his voice. "So, what's in the locket that has you smiling so warmly?" Ino asked curiously, wanting to know what has her crush smiling so warmly. She had to keep her usual tendencies to a minimum, something she could do since she left Sakura to talk to a couple of other girls. Ino ignored her fellow blonde and sat down next to him, smiling down at him. She completely missed the way Naruto's shadow bristled in frustration. "I said go away," Naruto snarled ominously, not bothering to disguise his furious tone, as he continued to glare at the blonde girl, making Ino anxious as she repressed the need to gulp. "Naruto-kun, come on! I just want to be your friend," Ino whimpered with a pout, her eyes sparkling as she gazed at her fellow blonde. She was certain she had him now, despite her little flinch. The expression she was delivering at the time always made her father give in. Alucard, Naruto thought, narrowing his eyes at Ino's pouting form. Regrettably for her, Naruto was not her father. "Understood, master," Alucard said, displaying her joy at the situation. To Ino's surprise, Naruto raised his hand and opened his palm as though something would appear in it. Suddenly, a sword appeared from his shadow, but it was very different from other swords and seemed to be demonic in nature. The demonic weapon had a curved handle, a serrated edge, a flat guard that was slightly curved with a red line that resembled a narrowed eye, and a wide, flat blade that was black and gray in color with a spiked and curved edge, Daedric sword from Skyrim. "I said to go away," Naruto hissed softly, glaring at her while holding the demonic blade fiercely. Ino stared at the sword, wondering where it had come from. How was it obtained by Naruto? Why did it appear so incredibly frightening? Lastly, it simply made Naruto appear so much more awesome in her opinion. Ino was struggling to determine whether to squeal or tremble in fear. When Naruto noticed Ino's hesitation, he gave a low growl. He detested fangirls. How can something like that be regarded as a female? Can I kill this girl, master? It is a barb to all women. Alucard thought. This swift beast is a worse monster than I am. With a tone of distaste as she snarled, the blonde's shadow becoming even more irritated. No, Naruto said right away. Come on, Alucard argued. It's not like anyone will miss her. 1. She is a member of the torture and interrogation department and the daughter of Yamanaka Inoichi, the head of the Yamanaka clan. 2. She has not yet caused any physical harm, Naruto clarified. Alucard only complained. Naruto allowed his demonic weapon to skim on the grass, the blade smoothly cutting it as he mentally shook his head slightly and intensified his focus at Ino's form. Naruto narrowed his eyes and said, Yamanaka-san, I told you to go away. If you refuse to listen to me this time, I'm afraid you won't like the results. Ino swallowed, and she laughed uneasily. She had just realized that she was probably bothering her fellow blonde more than she meant to, but it didn't matter since she was confident Naruto would pardon her. After all, true love goes on. When the bell rang to announce that it was time to resume their classes, Ino started to say something, but Naruto was grateful that she didn't. Unfortunately for Ino, who was trying to catch up to the kid moments later, she was unable to keep up with Naruto's swift and brisk pace. She later lost sight of him when they entered the building. The blonde let his demonic weapon melt in the shadows and hurried off. Ino sighed and then pouted, certain that she had him. Next time, she only needed to put forth a little more effort. However, she had to get to class first. After all, a clan heir wouldn't want to be late. Ichiraku Ayam hummed as she tapped the notebook in her hand. It was a happy tune that a few people in the vicinity were listening to as it passed by. When she heard someone enter the little ramen station, she stopped humming. She straightened up, took a quick breath, and smiled broadly at the new customer. Hello, welcome to Ichiraku Ramen. How may I help you? She said, her eyes closed and her face bright. After a little period of silence, a monotone voice that she was all too acquainted with spoke. I'll have my usual Ayam-san. Her smile widened when she opened her eyes and saw her surrogate little brother's face. Naruto! How was your first day in the academy? She inquired gently, her warm, dark eyes looking at him fondly. If Alucard had been visible, you would have seen her scowling at Ayam. Fine, he said curtly, his tone chipped. With a melancholy grin, Ayam murmured, I see, feeling a twinge of grief at the blonde's aloof demeanor. My order? Inquired Naruto. The girl with the brown hair nodded. Yes, of course, and went into the back of the stand. She returned a short while later with an empty glass cup. I still don't understand why you always want an empty glass cup, she said as she put it down. Unexpectedly, she returned to the stand and started preparing the blonde's customary order. Before looking around to make sure no one could see, Naruto looked at her. Then, he took out a kunai and, while sucking in air, the blonde stabbed the weapon into his left hand. With a small snicker, he held his hand over the glass and let his blood pool there. He squeezed his bleeding hand, causing more blood to drip into the glass. A few moments later, the glass was filled, and the blonde watched as his wound healed. The blonde picked up the glass and held it down at seat level while wiping blood off his palm. A moment later, a white-gloved hand emerged from his shadow, removed the glass cup from his hand, and slid back down. With joy in her voice, Alucard said, "Delicious and magnificent as always, master." "I appreciate the compliment, Alucard. Tell me, what was your impression of the academy?" As Ayam set a bowl of ramen in front of him, the blonde questioned absently, tapping his fingers. The brown-haired girl narrowed her eyes at the missing glass cup, but Naruto disregarded it and muttered a simple thank you. "I am a little disappointed with it, master. It is a place to teach children how to become shinobi. I expected the learning material to be about killing, espionage, interrogation, survival, and other essentials that you would require on the battlefield, but all you were learning was basic math, village history, and other mundane things that you could do in your spare time, not to mention you already know all those things, master." In conclusion, Alucard responded, "I think it was a waste of time. I agree with your observation. Instead of teaching us how to become, we are teaching us things that we could easily learn from reading a book." "It's not that hard to read and learn," Naruto remarked. Alucard asserted, "I think the academy will do more harm than good to you, master. I suggest only attending when it suits you, master. Perhaps when tests and other things of importance are coming up. That way you can keep your grades up even while barely attending the academy." "How so?" "Assuming that you attend the academy every day, you would have to modify your training schedule to fit in with the academy. Additionally, your training time would progressively decrease until you are spending too much time with the academy and not enough time training as usual. As a result," Alucard said, "I would lose a big percentage of the strength I already have, therefore accidentally weakening myself in the process," Naruto said, his eyes narrowing as he halted in his ramen consumption. "You would be far better off on your own, master. The academy is a waste of time." "Once again, your knowledge has proven to be helpful, Alucard," Naruto said, resisting the impulse to smile in public. "I am glad to be of help, master," Alucard said with a big smile on her face if she could have been seen. Naruto turned to face Ayam, who was tapping her notebook while gazing off into space. Her eyes were unfocused as she gazed at him, and he wondered absently what she was thinking before brushing it off. He went back to eating, intending to finish quickly so he could go home, but he stopped when he heard someone sit next to him. He looked to his right and gave the guy a chilly scowl immediately away. Hey? Iruka asked uneasily, a drop of perspiration on the back of his neck from Naruto's icy gaze. Why did he feel as though he was about to die? Iruka couldn't see Naruto's shadow move. After she had stopped staring at the blonde, Ayam turned to face her potential new client and said, "May I take your order?" with a kind smile. I'll have pork ramen, please," Urka replied in a courteous manner. Unnoticed by Iruka and Ayam, a glass cup was placed on the counter with a white-gloved hand gripping it tightly before the hand quickly disappeared back into the darkness. Ayam turned to go into the store, but she stopped for a brief moment to look at the empty glass, thinking, "That glass suddenly just appeared again," before she went into the back. Iruka stared at the glass, wondering absently where it had come from. He glanced at his student across from him, and while he slowly completed his meal, the blonde's eyes never left him. The teacher cleared his throat a little and said, "About earlier today Naruto-san," Naruto cut in. "Excuse me?" Iruka blinked and questioned. Ayam refrained from using the kun suffix because she knew he didn't like it, and the Sandaime constantly referred to him with it. Naruto stopped trying to correct the old man after he asked him to stop it 500 times. "You shall refer to me as San, or you shall address me by my surname, am I clear?" he said coldly, his eyes like glaciers as he glared at the Chunin. It goes without saying that she was a fangirl. Naruto would only ever permit one individual to use such a suffix with him, and that individual would only address him as master. It would be disrespectful to me, master, if I used such an affectionate suffix, Alucard stated. Mentally blinking, Naruto thought. He should learn to keep his surface thoughts private. I'd be happy to teach you how to master, Alucard added. Much to Alucard's well-known irritation, Iruka stumbled and muttered, "All right, Naruto-san," unintentionally bringing Naruto back to reality. "Anyway," he started, "I was wondering, that genjutsu you used on me earlier today, why couldn't I dispel it? Do you truly believe I would explain myself to you? I saw the way you looked at me back in class. If there is one thing I despise in this world, it's the look you gave me in class. The same look nearly everyone in this dam gives me." Naruto snorted, a hint of condensation audible as he spoke. Naruto sneered a flashback of the villagers glaring at him. His icy statement, "I put you in that genjutsu simply because I wanted those disgusting eyes of yours averted," caused Iruka to wince in shame and guilt. After saying, "I won't explain the genjutsu to you, figure it out for yourself," the blonde went back to eating his ramen with the intention of finishing it. In his mind, he was attempting to calm himself and try to stop the rage that was still brewing inside of him. Soon, he sensed Alucard's warm yet sinister presence filling his head. Her quiet murmurs soothed him as he let himself get lost in her voice, and the rage that was brewing inside of him subsided as Alucard put an end to it, as she always did whenever he became enraged. Although she always seemed to feed his rage, she always calmed him moments after one of his outbursts. Others would have viewed Alucard as a creature of pure evil that needed to be purified, but Naruto didn't mind her darkness. In fact, he loved her dark presence, and if leaving her behind meant entering the light, he would have preferred to stay with the darkness with his monstrous vampire. He allowed himself to bask a little in her mental embrace. Iruka gave the blonde an odd look, wondering absently why he had his eyes closed. The rage he could sense in the blonde was fading away, as if it had never been there in the first place, which perplexed Iruka. When he heard Ayam place a bowl of ramen in front of him, he murmured a small thank you and slowly savored the taste before going in for another. He heard a small thud and looked to see Naruto had placed some money on the counter. The blonde gave Ayam a small nod before he left the stand, and Ayam watched his form sadly as he did so. He continued to watch the blonde silently, as he ate his food swiftly and quietly. The brown-haired girl walked into the back after she abruptly said, "It makes me sad seeing him like this," glancing at Iruka out of the corner of her eye. "You know, he was so happy and cheerful back then, but now, he's so distant. Whatever the villagers say about him, they're wrong. As a teacher, it should be your job to know your students before judging them." Iruka scowled a little as he gazed at his image in the ramen bowl. He reflected on what he had seen of the blonde all day. Naruto was aloof to everyone and never made an effort to engage with people his own age. If the boy hadn't had such a chilly demeanor and expression, he might have appeared lonely. Iruka sighed and said he would make it up to the youngster in some way, showing him that there are others who are willing to see him for him. Iruka felt a twinge of pity and guilt for the blonde boy, pitying him because he understood what it was like to feel alone and remorse for passing judgment on him too hastily. Iruka sank into his meal after thinking that, resolved to meet the boy the following day. Alucard inquired absently as she relaxed on the couch. "So what movie are we watching tonight, master?" It had been several hours since they had returned to the flat, but they had a brief tag match, which gave Alucard the victory for the day. Naruto hummed as he perused the list of films that were in front of him. There were at least a dozen of them, but he was finding it hard to decide which one to watch. At last, one struck his eye. The blonde tossed the movie and said, "Hey, Alucard, what do you think of watching this one?" "Oh? A horror film featuring a vampire?" Alucard asked, looking at the title of the film, amusedly. "Why not?" she said, putting a small smile on her face. "I'm curious as to what the humans of this place think of vampires in the first place, considering they never met a true one like me before." She always found it amusing how frequently the human imagination of vampires always ran rampant. Naruto shrugged and dropped the movie in. As soon as it began, he snatched his preferred seat in Alucard's lap, with the no-life queen's arms reflexively enveloping him and her head resting on the spiky mess he called hair. Alucard thought the film was quite boring. She was occasionally offended by the way the humans in this planet characterized vampires. What kind of vampire cried like a young child when garlic even slightly frightened them? In the daylight, what kind of vampire fucking sparkles? Alucard's eye was twitching quickly toward the end of the film as she glared at the TV. After taking a long breath, she was able to control the rage that was building inside of her. She decided to track down the person who made the film and give them a slow, horrible death. She looked at her master, who was still on her lap, with her scarlet-red eyes, and she grinned sincere as she saw his sleeping form. She picked up her master and carried him to his bedroom, carefully lowering him onto the bed before grabbing a blanket and lowering herself on his form until only his head was exposed. "Good night, master," she whispered tenderly, but a frown soon took over her face when she realized 3 life forces had infiltrated the apartment building and were moving toward this floor. The no-life queen then moved through the darkness with a savage snarl. She chose to stay hidden in the shadows, wanting to play with the 3 soon-to-be-dead humans, as it only took a second to get to where they were. One of them whispered, "Kenji, should we really be doing this?" In response, the person Alucard thought was Kenji said, "Shut it, Takashi, you want to put the demon in his place, right? Both of you shut up. I just want to teach the demon to not take us so lightly. The way he was walking around the village like he was equal to us, it pisses me off." The third person argued. Alucard's face briefly displayed a menacing frown before her smirk reappeared. Playtime had arrived. As soon as the villagers entered the hallway, it was completely dark, making it difficult for them to see anything but themselves. Fearfully, Kenji questioned, "What's going on?" Unless you count hundreds of eyes opening in the dark and giving the man a response, he never got one. With hundreds of people staring at him and his companions, Takashi said, What? "Kenji Jin, please tell me you're seeing this," he said. Jin and Kenji nodded as they retreated and peered around in terror, their eyes never leaving their shapes. They soon heard a menacing female laugh, and they saw Alucard come out of the shadows, her lower body still making contact with the surrounding darkness. Her crimson eyes gleamed menacingly, and she flashed a fanged smile at the 3 guys. Her smile widened, frightening the 3 in front of her even more. Well, she started. "What's this? 3 small, lost dogs who wandered into a kennel to be put down. You 3 have 2 options on how you wish to die. Option 1, slow and painful, and Option 2, very slow and very agonizing. So tell me, dogs, which is it?" she asked menacingly, taking slow, mocking steps. With their eyes wide with fear, the 3 attempted to turn and flee, but a minute later they collapsed to the ground, wailing in agony, clutching their stumps where their feet had been. When they looked back, they were horrified to see 3 big black dogs with many eyes consuming their missing feet. One of the dangerous dogs had finished earlier and had started viciously fighting with the other dog over the feet it was attempting to eat. The 3 villagers attempted to crawl away from the terrible girl, their survival instincts taking over as they shouted and crawled away. But Alucard simply walked by them, gently touching one on the head as she went. As Alucard trampled on his back, Jin was the first to perish. Jin screamed in fear, tears of despair streaming down his cheeks, and then Alucard ruthlessly inserted her hand through the man's back. Her hand broke and shattered bones as it passed through his chest and out the other side. She took her hand off his chest, leaving a hole the size of a hand, and she held something slowly beating in her heart. She turned to face the 2 men who were left, who were horrified to see that she was holding their friend's still beating heart. Alucard laughed hysterically and squeezed, shattering the beating heart and leaving blood all over her face. When Alucard started to approach them, the last 2 men screamed in horror and fear. They whimpered as she stopped and started licking the blood off her face and hands. A few moments later, she started to approach them once more, and as she approached them, the 2 men felt tears streaming down their cheeks. She halted a foot away from them, and the 2 sobbed even harder as centipedes started to emerge from her feet from underneath her. The centipedes started crawling all over the 2, some of them tearing into their skin and entering their bodies. They started to move around inside their skins, which made the experience more painful, and they started to tear into the men's bones, which caused the men to scream more loudly in agony. Alucard watched with a terrible smile on her face as the centipedes outside their bodies simply tore apart their muscles and skin, consuming small but frequent pieces of flesh. Kenji screamed in excruciating pain. What are you? Takashi was screaming next to him. A real fucking vampire, Alucard said, her smile widening as she gazed at the dying guy with delight. The 2 men were surrounded by more centipedes, which soon dispersed and left only bloodstains on the floor. Alucard's hellhounds then started licking the blood off the floor, and she started down the hall before stopping at a window and gazing out at the Konoha village with her scarlet eyes. She gave a low growl and glared down the village with disgust and distaste before continuing to walk down the hall. She quickly arrived at the newly constructed door leading to her lair, entered, and proceeded down another set of halls, which gradually started to get darker and more dilapidated. She discovered herself in front of a large double pair of doors, which she opened to reveal the spacious room that was her lair. The cells were still empty and rusted, there was a little mist still present, the screams of the past were muffled by her exorcisms, and her midnight black coffin was in the center. She approached her coffin and used her telekinesis to open it. She went inside her casket and let her eyes close as it closed. She then fell asleep, daydreaming about what the future held for her and her beloved master. End of chapter. There is chapter 2. The following chapter will most likely jump ahead to Naruto's 2nd year or his graduation day, though I'm still debating that. Now for an omake that was motivated by the review of Garmin Z Evil. Omake, the Inuzuka clan is revealed to Alucard. Master, who are the Inuzuka clan? Alucard asks, looking up quizzically from her book, which was about Konoha's history. The Inuzuka clan is basically a clan of humans who are dog-like in nature. From what I heard, they're becoming more like their canine counterparts with each generation. Naruto, who was reading a book about chakra, responded without taking his eyes off his book. Alucard pictured a whole group of people posing as dogs, being led on a leash through the streets, eating snacks, and letting their tongues roll out of their mouths like dogs. They would say, "Woof," while receiving pats on the head and be instructed to sit if they desired a treat. The idea of this Inuzuka clan being dog-like sent her into a hysterical fit, and she couldn't help but laugh at such a ridiculous notion. She held her sides while she laughed, her mind conjuring up new scenarios in which humans were placed in dog situations, such as performing tricks and other ridiculous things that only dogs could do. If anything, it made her laugh even harder. After a few minutes, Naruto gave her a strange look as Alucard's laughter subsided. She couldn't resist asking, "Master, can this Inuzuka clan attract fleas as well?" She anticipated receiving a negative response because, regardless of how closely a human imitated a dog, they would never be able to catch fleas as well. "It is confirmed that members in the Inuzuka clan can in fact attract fleas," replied Naruto. Alucard sputtered as her laughing came back with a vengeance.